It started like any other quiet winter morning in the Colorado foothills, snow on the rooftops, wind brushing pine trees, and the familiar silence that only small mountain towns know. Sarah Whitaker, a retired nurse in her late 60s, had just brewed her morning coffee when her golden retriever, Buddy, began growling at the front door. He rarely growled. Barked, yes, whimpered, sure, but growling never. She paused, mug in hand, and moved slowly toward the door. Then came the scratching, not loud, but deliberate, steady, like claws against wood. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Again her heart quickened. Coyotes sometimes wandered close, but this was no coyote. It was too rhythmic. Cautiously she peeked through the frosted window. What she saw made her drop the coffee mug to the floor. Standing on her porch was a massive German shepherd, fur soaked in fresh, dark blood, steam rising from its body, in the cold air. But that wasn't the worst part. Tied to the dog's back, barely held by ropes made from torn fabric and what looked like paracord, was a young girl, unconscious, slumped forward like a sack of potatoes. Her arms were bound at the wrists. Her face was pale, lips slightly blue. Duct tape dangled from one cheek, and blood, though not as much as on the dog, stained her shirt. For a split second, Sarah froze. The dog stared at her through the glass, eyes dark and intelligent, breathing heavily. It didn't snarl, it didn't move. It just waited. Then the girl moaned, faint, weak, but alive. Sarah flung the door open. Oh my God, she muttered, rushing forward. The dog let out a single low growl, protective, not aggressive. It stood still as Sarah knelt, carefully cradling the girl. The ropes were tight but not cruel, as if whoever had tied them had done it quickly, maybe in desperation. The girl couldn't speak, but her lips moved and Sarah leaned closer. Help. Him, the girl whispered, eyes fluttering. He saved me. Sarah didn't know who he was, but this girl had clearly been through hell. Don't worry, sweetheart, she said, voice shaking. You're safe now. She grabbed her phone and called 911. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain what she was seeing. There's a dog, a child. She's tied to the dog, covered in blood. Within minutes, the wail of sirens echoed up the road. Paramedics, sheriff's deputies, and a small crowd of onlookers gathered as Sarah led them to the porch. Cameras from officers' body cams captured the surreal scene. A blood-soaked dog, calm but alert, watching over a barely conscious girl like a silent guardian. As medics untied her and lifted her into the ambulance, the dog tried to climb in behind her. One officer instinctively reached out to stop it, and the dog snapped, barking once, warning, before sitting again at the door of the vehicle, whining. The medics looked at each other. Let him come, one said. She won't let go of him anyway. Inside the ambulance, the girl gripped the dog's fur as if it were her lifeline. She slipped back into unconsciousness moments later, but something even more chilling emerged during transport. The blood all over the dog's body wasn't the girl's. EMTs confirmed she had only superficial wounds. So where had the blood come from? And who was this mysterious man she whispered about? The one who saved her. No one had answers yet, but everyone knew this was no ordinary rescue. And this dog wasn't just some stray. Something terrible had happened in those woods, and this dog had run through it to bring back the only person it could save. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft rustling of IV bags. Emily, the girl who had arrived tied to a blood-soaked German shepherd, lay asleep, her fragile frame barely making an impression on the mattress. A nurse leaned over to check her vitals when Emily stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and confused, darting across the room until they landed on the one constant presence since her arrival, the dog, Max. He lay curled at the foot of her bed, his fur still matted with dried blood, his breathing steady, one eye open and watching. Nurse called for the attending physician. Within minutes, a child psychologist, a trauma nurse, and 2 detectives entered the room gently, not wanting to overwhelm her. Emily? The woman in soft blue scrubs asked. You're safe now. You're in a hospital. My name's Dr. Lang. Can you hear me? Emily blinked slowly, then nodded. Do you know your name? She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Emily Parker. That was the moment Detective Ramos, standing by the door, felt his stomach drop. Emily Parker had been missing for 3 days, abducted while walking home from school in Boulder. Posters with her picture had been plastered across half the state. Her parents had been interviewed on national news. It had felt like a dead-end case until this morning. Dr. Lang gently sat beside her. Emily, can you tell us what happened? To you? Emily's lip quivered. There were men in masks. They took me in a van. They had a cage in a basement, cold, no windows. She looked at the dog and reached a weak hand toward him. Max immediately rose and nuzzled against her palm. And then he came. The room went silent. Who? Asked Ramos, stepping closer. Who came, Emily? She blinked, remembering. A man. Tall, beard, hurt arm. He broke the lock, said he'd been watching them, that they were part of something big. He was bleeding, but he smiled at me. She hesitated. He untied me, told me he had to go back for the others. Said I was small, light, that Max could carry me. He tied me to Max's back, said, Go home, boy, take her far. Emily choked out the next part. Then I heard gunshots. Everyone in the room exchanged glances. He saved me, Emily said, her eyes filled with tears, but he stayed behind. Dr. Lang leaned closer. Did he tell you his name, sweetheart? She nodded slowly. Darren. Ramos straightened. Darren Cross? Emily's face lit up. Yes, that's him. The room went cold. Darren Cross had been presumed dead 6 months ago after disappearing into the Rockies. His truck had been found abandoned. A wilderness search turned up. Nothing. The case had gone cold. Just another eccentric ex-military guy who vanished. But now he was back in the middle of something much, much darker. That same hour, the sheriff's office ran the dog's microchip. The results confirmed it. The German shepherd's name was Max, registered to Darren Cross, but Darren was supposed to be dead. So how had his dog shown up in a town 30 miles away, carrying a missing child on its back? And if Darren had survived, where was he now? The blood on Max had already been sent for forensic analysis. Initial tests confirmed something chilling. The blood wasn't Emily's. In fact, it didn't belong to her at all. Multiple DNA profiles were found on Max's fur, at least 3 different sources. Someone, maybe several someones, had bled out near that dog. Detective Ramos made a call to the FBI's Denver field office. You're going to want to see this, he said grimly. We've got a vigilante ex-soldier, a blood-soaked dog, a rescued kidnapped girl, and possibly a mass crime scene in the mountains. A cold wind swept through the pine-studded hills as a convoy of black SUVs crept up the narrow logging road just beyond Pine Creek, Colorado. Inside the lead vehicle, Special Agent Michelle Vega of the FBI stared at a photo on her tablet. Darren Cross, former Green Beret, listed KIA 6 months ago, until yesterday when his dog showed up covered in blood, with a kidnapped girl strapped to its back. Ma'am, the agent beside her said, we've got satellite scans of the forest. Around Cross's last known location. Heat signatures. Something was moving there recently. Vega tapped the screen. Get us there. That dog didn't run 30 miles through frozen mountains for fun. Something happened out there. Something big. Back in town, local forensics had finished testing the blood on Max. The results sent shockwaves through the station. 3 separate DNA profiles. All male, none of them matched Darren. Worse, 2 matched known human traffickers in an FBI database, men tied to an unsolved case from New Mexico. The third was unknown, likely still out there. Agent Vega's boots crunched through frozen pine. Needles as her team fanned out following the trail. Max was with them, his nose low, his pace urgent. The dog hadn't rested since bringing Emily home. He was focused, relentless, like he was leading them back into the fire. They hiked 5 miles before the first sign appeared, a blood smear on a tree trunk. Then shattered branches, a torn glove, the tip of a broken combat knife buried in frozen soil. Max stopped at a clearing, whined, dug. They found a trail, barely visible, but marked with dried blood and drag marks. One of the agents knelt beside it. "This isn't animal," he said, touching the smear. "This is someone pulling a body." The deeper they went, the worse it got. At mile 10, they found a campsite, hidden by camo netting and branches. Inside were torn tarps, a backpack with empty rifle magazines, a flare gun, and a shredded sleeping bag soaked in old blood. Then they found the journal, half-burned, partially legible. Pages torn by water damage and ash, but one line stood out in smeared ink. "They've taken kids before, back roads, backwoods. Cops don't look where no one's supposed to live. I followed them. I found where they keep them." Agent Vega stared at the words for a long time. Darren Cross hadn't gone off-grid. He hadn't lost his mind. He'd been hunting, following the traffickers, gathering evidence, living like a ghost in the forest, because he knew if he came forward without proof, no one would believe him. The man they called Paranoid was actually onto something horrific. A voice crackled over Vega's radio. "We found something." To about 300 yards east, the team moved fast. There, under a rise near the tree line, was a charred structure, not quite a house, more like a fortified shack, burned from the inside out. Bullet holes riddled the metal siding. The smell of smoke and blood still clung to the air. A few feet from the wreckage lay 3 distinct blood pools. No bodies, just drag marks leading into the woods. Inside the remains of the shack, they found another scorched journal, a homemade radio rig, and a hand-drawn map. On it, red X's, back roads, rest stops, all places where children had vanished. "In the last year." "Jesus," one agent muttered. This guy had been watching them for months. Suddenly Max growled. Low, warning. From the edge of the tree line came a rustle. Weapons raised, a figure stumbled out of the woods, bloodied, barefoot, shackles still clinging to one ankle. Another child. Agent Vega stepped forward. "How many of you were there?" she asked softly. The boy's lips trembled. "There's more," he said. "They said they'd be back, but he stopped them." "Who?" Vega asked. The boy looked down at Max. Him. The man with the dog. The trees grew denser, the air colder, and the silence heavier as Agent Vega and her team pressed deeper into the forest. Max trotted ahead, leading with purpose, ears up, muscles tight. The boy they'd rescued, name unknown, age guessed, around 11, had said only one more thing before collapsing from exhaustion. "There's a place under the cabin. That's where they put the ones they don't move." Now, Max stopped abruptly at a thicket of gnarled spruce. He began pawing at the snow, tail stiff. One of the agents moved beside him and swept away branches, revealing something hidden beneath, a manhole door half buried in dirt and frost. The team readied their weapons. Agent Vega gave the nod. A crowbar wedged under the rusted edge, and with a strained heave the hatch popped open, releasing a hiss of stale, damp air. They descended into darkness. The staircase was narrow, hand-carved from stone, slick with moss. The deeper they went, the more the scent shifted. Mildew, sweat, and something far worse. Decay. At the bottom was a steel door. It wasn't locked. When they pushed it open, flashlights swept across the horror Darren Cross had tried to stop. The room was soundproofed, lined with mattresses soaked in old stains. Shackles bolted to the floor. A generator powered a single dim bulb swinging from the ceiling. And along one wall a line of children's shoes, arranged by size like trophies. Vega's stomach twisted. Then came the sound, a shuffle, a whimper. In the far corner, hidden behind a false panel, they found 2 children, both no older than 8, pale, starving, hands tied. Their eyes widened in terror until Max approached. The boy recognized him and broke into sobs. "He told us help was coming," he whispered. "He said the dog would bring someone." The girl beside him clung to Max like he was the only safe thing left in the world. Outside, agents called in medical evac. Vega stayed behind, flashlight aimed at a blood-stained desk shoved against the wall. On it, a stack of Polaroids, some showing other children, others showing armed men in masks. And next to them, a worn blood-specked notebook. It was Darren's. Inside, his final entries were chilling. "They're moving them at night. Cargo vans, 2 drivers, 3 guards. I've seen 6 different kids come and go in the last week. Max knows the escape trail. If I don't make it out, he will. There are still more. If I don't stop them now, they'll disappear forever. The last page was dated the morning Emily was found. Agent Vega stood in silence for a moment before turning to her team. Get this to HQ. Every word, every photo. Just as they began collecting evidence, another agent radioed in from the perimeter. Found, dead body. Fresh, male, military ID on him. Name's Darren Cross. Vega froze. Outside the cabin, she found him. Darren lay face down in the snow, just beyond a half-dug trench. Bullet wounds riddled his chest. One arm was outstretched toward a smashed comms radio. His rifle lay beside him, empty. Blood had painted the ground beneath him. But on his face, and frozen even in death, was something unexpected. A faint, resolute smile. The man had known he wouldn't survive, but he'd done it anyway. Behind him, drag marks led into the trees. Not his, the traffickers'. At least 2 bodies had been pulled away from the site. Whether taken by their own or eaten by the forest, no one could say yet. All Vega could say for sure was this: Darren Cross had declared war. And this cabin was his battlefield. The media would never be told the full truth. But the FBI now knew. They hadn't just stumbled onto a case. They'd arrived after the hero had already fought it, and they were still behind him. The forensic team had barely begun processing the cabin when the forest around them fell eerily silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Agent Vega stood near Darren Cross's body, her eyes scanning the bleak horizon, but her mind was miles away, wrestling with the enormity of what they had uncovered. Darren's sacrifice had stopped a shipment, but it hadn't stopped the operation. Inside the cabin, the youngest survivors clung to Max, whose steady presence was a silent comfort amid the chaos. The boy who'd led them here shivered, glancing at every shadow, as if expecting something to leap from the darkness. "We need to know who else is out there," Vega said grimly over the radio. "This is only the beginning." Back at FBI headquarters, analysts worked through Darren's notebook and the Polaroids. A terrifying pattern emerged. The traffickers weren't just kidnapping children, they were part of a larger ring, operating across state lines, using remote mountain routes to move victims unseen. Vega sat in the command center, staring at a digital map littered with red dots. Each was a location tied to disappearances, some dating back years. The scale of it was staggering. Suddenly the room buzzed. An encrypted message intercepted on one of Darren's smashed radios had just come through. It was short, a garbled voice. Her code phrase and coordinates pointing to a second cabin, deeper in the forest. "We're not done," Vega muttered, standing. Within minutes, a tactical team geared up and moved out. Max trotted alongside, his gaze sharp, tail stiff like a warning. The forest grew darker as they advanced, the path twisting and closing in. At the coordinates, they found a cabin eerily similar to the first, but this one was alive with noise. Muffled, voices, footsteps, the faint clink of chains. Vega signaled for quiet. They crept closer. Inside, children cried softly in the dim light. Some sat huddled, others paced anxiously. A man barked orders, rough, angry, his voice carrying authority. There were guards armed, moving like shadows. The team's plan was clear: wait for backup. But Max had other ideas. With a low, guttural growl, he burst through a side door, barking furiously. Chaos exploded. Guards scrambled to respond. Shouts filled the air. Max led the charge, darting between legs, snapping at ankles, buying precious seconds as the FBI team stormed in. The rescue was brutal and quick. Children were freed, guards disarmed or fleeing into the woods. But in the chaos, a figure slipped away. A man with a thick beard and a bloody arm. "Darren," someone whispered. But the man was gone. The survivors were led out, their faces pale, eyes wide with shock and relief. They told stories of endless nights locked in darkness, of whispers in the walls, and the fear of never seeing the sun again. Back at headquarters, Vega studied the intel. The man who escaped, the leader, was known only as the Handler. He coordinated the entire operation, kept the network running, and was rumored to be untouchable. Emily Parker's voice echoed in Vega's mind. He said he was watching them. Darren had been fighting a shadow army, but now with Darren dead and the handler free, the stakes were higher than ever. That night, as the survivors slept under heavy guard, Vega sat alone, piecing together Darren's final transmissions. Then came the call, a voice on the line, distorted, almost mechanical. "You have only delayed the inevitable," it said. "We will return, and next time the dog won't come." Vega's hand trembled as she ended the call. The war was far from over. The FBI's Denver field office buzzed with activity. Intelligence officers, agents, and analysts moved in a controlled frenzy, piecing together fragments of a vast human trafficking network that stretched like a dark web across the country. But despite the progress, Agent Vega knew the most dangerous player, the handler, was still out there, watching, waiting. "We've identified a compound in the foothills of the Rockies," Agent Vega announced to the team. "Satellite. Images show heavy security, armed patrols in what looks like underground tunnels. It matches the patterns in Darren's notes. This has to be the nerve center." A task force was assembled overnight, merging local law enforcement with tactical FBI units. Max, still exhausted but vigilant, sat quietly beside Vega, sensing the storm to come. Before dawn, they moved out. The approach was silent and tense. Thick fog blanketed the forest, muffling footsteps and cloaking their advance. The compound came into view, a sprawling, fortified complex surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Spotlights swept the grounds. Vega's heart pounded. Inside, children's faint cries echoed through ventilation shafts. Somewhere in the shadows, captives waited for rescue. The breach began with a coordinated strike. Snipers took out lookout posts. Breaching teams slammed through perimeter fences, and agents swept inside, weapons ready. Suddenly alarms blared. Red lights flashed. The compound erupted into chaos. Gunfire cracked through the air. Explosions shook the buildings. Amidst the smoke, Vega and her team pushed forward, navigating dark corridors lined with cell doors and steel cages. Each room told a grim story. Children's drawings scrawled on walls, empty plates, ragged blankets. Then they found the command center. Screens flickered with live feeds from surveillance cameras scattered across the facility, maps pinpointed, trafficking routes, payment records, and encrypted communications. And there, on the largest screen, was the man. The handler. His beard was longer, his eyes cold and calculating. A bulletproof vest clung to his chest, and a pistol gleamed. At his hip, Vega's radio crackled. "Target located, move in." The team breached the door, but the handler was ready. He raised his weapon and fired. Bullets ricocheted off the steel walls as agents returned fire. Vega dove behind a console, heart racing. Then came a voice over the handler's comms. "You don't understand what you've started." A hidden door slid open behind him. He disappeared into a narrow tunnel. Vega signaled a chase. The underground passages twisted and turned, damp and suffocating. Max led the way, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled. The handler's footsteps echoed ahead. Suddenly the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, lit only by flickering emergency lights. There, dozens of children huddled, guarded by armed men, the sea. Handler stood at the center, smirking. "You think this ends with me?" he taunted. "This network is bigger than one man." Vega raised her weapon. "Put down your guns, it's over." The handler laughed. "It's only just beginning." Before anyone could react, explosions rocked the chamber. The traffickers. Reinforcements had arrived. Gunfire erupted. Vega shielded the children as chaos tore through the chamber. Max growled, lunging at one attacker, buying Vega precious seconds. In the melee, Vega spotted an opportunity. She darted toward the handler, tackling him to the ground. A struggle ensued. But despite his strength, the handler was no match for Vega's resolve. Handcuffs clicked. The traffickers surrendered or fled into the tunnels. The children were finally safe, exhausted but triumphant. Vega looked down at the handler. "Your empire is finished." Outside, dawn broke over the mountains. News crews would call it a major breakthrough, a daring raid that shattered a child trafficking ring. But for Vega, it was personal. She thought of Darren Cross, the man who had started this war, whose courage had led them here. As Max sat faithfully by her side, she whispered, "We did it, Darren, we finished what you started." But deep in the shadows, other eyes watched the compound's ruins. The handler's final words echoed in the wind. "It's only just beginning." The sun was beginning to warm the rugged peaks as the last of the survivors were loaded onto ambulances. Agent Vega stood outside the compound, watching the children, faces pale but safe, being led away from the nightmare they'd endured. Max sat loyally at her feet, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. He had done his part, and Vega knew the dog's job wasn't over yet. But for now, justice had been served. Inside the command center, screens showed live news coverage. The world was waking up to the story, the daring raid that exposed one of the largest child trafficking rings in decades. But while the headlines celebrated the victory, Vega felt the weight of what had been lost. Darren Cross. His body had been transported back to headquarters. The forensic team had confirmed what they already knew: multiple bullet wounds, signs of prolonged struggle, and exhaustion etched into every muscle. A man who'd fought to the very end. Vega stared at his photo pinned on the wall, surrounded by notes and evidence. He had been a ghost for months, living in the shadows, following dangerous men who thought they were untouchable. Now, thanks to him, the network was broken. Yet the silence in her chest whispered unease. Back at the station, interviews began. Survivors spoke in hushed tones about the horrors they'd witnessed, the beatings, the endless nights in darkness, the whispered promises of rescue from a man and his dog. Emily Parker, the girl who had started it all, was quiet but steady. Her eyes, once hollow with fear, held a flicker of hope. Vega approached her gently. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Emily hesitated, then whispered, "Safe, because of Max, because of Darren." Vega nodded, tears prickling. "You're safe. Now we'll make sure of it." But even as the survivors began healing, new threats loomed. Encrypted chatter intercepted on FBI channels revealed splinter cells, fragments of the trafficking ring trying to regroup. One name surfaced repeatedly: the Broker. No one knew who he was, but his influence ran deep, spanning continents. Vega leaned back in her chair, exhaustion clouding her thoughts. Darren's war had been just one battle in a much larger fight. Suddenly, an alert blinked on her screen. Secure file had been uploaded to the FBI's servers, an anonymous message with a chilling warning: "You caught the handler." But the Broker never loses. He watches. He waits. The message was accompanied by a photo, a child's drawing of a dog, but this one had red eyes. Vega's pulse quickened. She looked down at Max, curled up nearby, his eyes calm and steady. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The mountain wind howled across Darren Cross's gravesite. A simple headstone stood alone near the forest edge, etched with his name, military rank, and 4 quiet words. He didn't run away. Agent Vega stood in silence, a hand resting on Max's head. The sun filtered through the trees as if the forest itself was mourning its lost protector. The burial had been quiet, private, no headlines, no flags, just the people who knew what he had really done. Max let out a low, soft whine and pressed his nose against the grave. Vega knelt beside him. "You kept your promise. So will I." The next day, the FBI released an official statement declaring the dismantling of the trafficking ring. They called it Operation Deep Silence. The public was told the handler had died in the raid. That part was true, at least officially. But inside the bureau, Vega knew better. The handler was alive. And someone had helped him escape from federal custody just hours after his arrest. A black van, a fake transfer order, vanished. There was a leak. Someone inside. Vega paced her office, reviewing the final entries in Darren's recovered hard drive. He'd been tracking the Broker, the shadowy figure above even the handler. She read Darren's last decrypted message aloud, voice steady. "The handler is a monster. But the Broker, he's the one who builds the cage. I can feel him watching me. Every step I take, he's 3 ahead. But if you're reading this, then I got close, and that means you can finish it. Then attached, a GPS file buried in an encrypted subfolder coordinates to a private island off the Gulf Coast, a location tied to offshore shell companies, private flights and missing cargo containers. It was a place that didn't officially exist. Vega stared at the file. It wasn't over. She brought the evidence to Director Marshall that evening. He listened silently, then shut the folder. "Do you know how deep this goes?" he said. "We follow this lead, and we won't just be facing traffickers. We'll be facing politicians, businessmen, the elite, people who don't lose." Vega didn't blink. "Then we don't give them the option." Marshall sighed, then leaned forward. "You'll need to go off book, no backup, no trail. And if you get caught—" "I won't," she said. The next morning, Vega disappeared from the bureau. So did Max. There was no official notice, no file, no trace, just a quiet line from Marshall to his assistant. "Don't ask where she went. Just pray she comes back." 3 weeks later, in a humid port town on the Gulf Coast, a man in a fine suit stepped into his luxury car. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He opened it, a single photo, a gravestone, a name, Darren Cross, and below it, a second photo, Max. The man's hand trembled. He turned toward his driver, but it was already too late. The Guillaume's car door clicked shut from outside. Standing in front of the vehicle, half-shadowed in the morning light, was Agent Vega. No badge, no backup, just her eyes locked on his. "You've been watching," she said. "Now it's your turn to be hunted." From the forest behind her, Max growled low and deep. The man's scream was swallowed by the wind. The world would never know the full story. The headlines would fade. The children would slowly begin to heal. But in the dark corners where power fed on silence, a new name began to spread. A whisper spoken with dread. "She's still out there, the agent with the war dog, and she doesn't play by the rules. Some monsters live in shadows, but some shadows learn to fight back." This was never just a rescue, it was a reckoning. The legacy of Darren Cross had only just begun.